I can't say that this is a fact. I think I personally have to say this is fiction because I think this is just me speculating recklessly because that's what we're doing here today.
Right.
Welcome into the NFL on Fox podcast. I'm your host, Dave Helman, and I am back in your feed for another round of NFL news, draft speculation, all of the fun stuff that goes along with the NFL news cycle in April. Got a wonderful show for y'all today, just because we're going to recklessly speculate. I'm going to be joined by my good friend, NFC North reporter for Fox Sports, Carmen Vitali, to play a game of fact or fiction. And Carmen giggled. So, yeah, let's just throw it to her. We don't have to wait on the reveal.
Sorry.
Carmen Vitali joins me in studio. We're going to play a game of NFL fact or fiction with some of the storylines, some of the rumors, some of the smoke screens that are flying around.
Lying season.
As they always do in early April. We got plenty more coming your way. We got Carmen. We're going to talk to the Athletics' Dane Brugler later this week for more draft prep, his draft guide on the way out. We're going to talk to him about it. So much content coming your way. Make sure you're subscribed on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. Make sure you give us a follow on the old YouTube channel, wherever you get your NFL news and podcasts. As always, you can find us there. Jam-packed show, which we are going to do fact or fiction, but in the interest of synergy, we're going to start off. It is a draft conversation, and yet it's not. So Carmen Vitali joins me, NFC North reporter, Chicago Bears writer for FoxSports.com.
That's me.
And it's almost like we planned this out ahead of time, Carm, because you have a big story hitting FoxSports.com today, Monday. So if you're hearing this Tuesday, you can go back and find it, foxsports.com and the Fox Sports app. It is about a Bears draft prospect.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it's really not, because it's about Caleb Williams. That's what I'm getting to. It's about Caleb Williams.
Half of it is about Caleb Williams,
who we can assume will be a Chicago Bear.
Yeah.
And what you did was you went and actually looked at what we think the Bears offense will look like under new offensive coordinator Shane Waldron. And like, okay, cool. You heard your name called, Caleb. You got your draft cap. What does that mean? And so I'm curious, what did you learn about the Bears offense and what we can expect to see when Caleb Williams actually gets to work in Chicago?
I watched a lot of Seattle's offense for this piece, and I talked to a bunch of coaches that have actually played against Shane Waldron about what this offense does, what it does well, what makes it unique. And I came away kind of a believer in the Chicago Bears and what they're doing. Not only do you have this number one overall pick opportunity, and Caleb Williams presumably has the opportunity to come into probably the best situation a quarterback taken first overall has ever come into, because Ryan Poles has curated this roster. It's a really good landing spot. You've got some veteran weapons.
Maybe the best ever spot for a number one overall pick.
That's what I'm saying. And potentially a top 5 defense to lean on, all these wonderful things. But the biggest thing that's, I think, going unnoticed and what I haven't seen is what Shane Waldron brings to the table. So that's why I decided to go, watch it. I watched a lot of Seattle tape. And what I came away with was a pretty simplistic offense, very player friendly, ton of, mid-zone up front in their run scheme, a lot of quick game play action that utilizes tight ends to set it up, multiple tight end sets, in fact, to set it up. But it's based off of like 4 main plays and then builds from there. I kept running into the same phrase every time when looking this over and looking at Shane Waldron's offense. And the phrase was, there are guys that can call plays, and then there are guys that can call games. Shane Waldron is the latter, and there is a very important distinction there, and it's not something that Chicago had last year. So it got me really excited about it.
That's a bar, by the way.
It's a total bar.
Calling games, not plays.
Right.
So, well, you mentioned there's 4 core plays.
Yeah.
What are they? Like, what can I expect to see?
Mid-zone run to the left, mid-zone run to the right, bootleg to the left, bootleg, naked bootleg to the left, naked bootleg to the right.
So this is an offense where we can expect Shane Waldron is going to have Caleb Williams on the move somewhat reliably. And I don't mean that as if to say Caleb is going to run for all of these yards, but using his athleticism to get him in space, get him away from pressure, and presumably, if you're bootlegging, that's often, I hate to call it an easy read, but like a more simplistic read for a quarterback.
Yeah, everything starts there. And I had actually a coach put it to me really well that has played against Seattle now the last couple of seasons. And he said so many people, when they're setting up play action, because there's a huge play action component to Shane Waldron's offense, so many teams, when they try to set up play action, they set it up with runs that they don't actually run in real life. Like a team will try to show power and they don't actually run power. So the defense is like, we know exactly what you're doing. Shane Waldron will absolutely run exactly what he's showing you he's going to run. In some cases, as the clock is winding down in a shootout on 3rd and long, he's going to run the ball. The quote from the coach, it's in the article, he said, the only guy that's ever had the balls to do that against us has been Ben Johnson, Detroit's Ben Johnson. He's never seen anybody else be able to run it against his defense, which is really funny. So it adds to this, there's not a lot of predictability, which allows it to stay simple and just add kind of all this window dressing. So it's very easy to grasp in the very beginning, and then you go from there. The system evolves as the season goes on. It evolves within a game, in fact, but it allows you to stay very unpredictable despite the fact that it's only coming off of like 4 plays.
Which I think that feels like such an in vogue aspect of NFL offenses right now,
Sure.
where I mean, going all the way, like Sean McVay got notoriety for doing this when he first got to LA.
Where was Shane Waldron first a coordinator?
The Los Angeles Rams?
Yeah.
That tracks. Basically, it's just running the same stuff out of a bunch of different looks.
Right.
I mean, that is oversimplifying it, I'm sure.
Completely.
I'm sure the Chicago Bears are going to run more than 4 plays this year.
They are.
But it's like the core concept of what do we do really well and how can we make that look confusing? I think you see that a lot with the Detroit Lions as well. I'm curious if running the ball is going to be such a part of this, and we know DeAndre Swift signed in Chicago. It's actually like their first signing.
Yeah.
Which often
that was the splash of Chicago.
You'll often see like the priorities that teams set in free agency sort of show you what they think they want to do. I'm curious.
It all makes sense now.
How do you feel about the Bears' offensive line if that is to be a calling card at the start of Caleb Williams' career?
The Bears have also invested resources in the offensive line. You have not 1 but 2 veteran centers now to be brought in for depth. You have Ryan Bates and Shelton, and they're making strides in that area. But what was so good about Shane Waldron's system is that in that mid-zone scheme, it thrives off double teams. So it actively seeks out double teams for offensive linemen and sticks to them. In fact, it can almost do that to a fault, whereas if you're trying to do some things post-snap and adjust, if the defense adjusts to what you're doing, and there's not a lot of post-snap options you have because you're supposed to stay on your double team. But what that does is it really helps out the offensive line, and he utilizes tight ends to do this. The way that Shane Waldron utilizes multiple tight end sets is very unique, while also not being unlike what Kyle Shanahan does in San Francisco, except Kyle Shanahan does it with multiple running backs. Shane Waldron likes his tight ends for that reason, and it's because they can act as extensions of the offensive line on top of being threats in the receiving game.
Let's go into that, because that's where I was going to go next.
Yeah.
And you mentioned in the story, yeah, I mean, it's the big talking point with the 49ers now, what San Francisco can do with Christian McCaffrey and Kyle Juszczyk on the field at the same time. It's the classic dilemma of, do you go big, do you go small? And San Francisco can punish you either way.
Mm-hmm.
Apply that to this Bears offense, because that was my favorite part of this story, which, again, go read it, is how Shane Waldron uses multiple tight end sets. And again, you talk about they signed DeAndre Swift. It's a signal of what they want to do. They already have Cole Kmet, who is, if he's not one of the best tight ends in football, he's an upper level NFL tight end.
Yes.
And then they go right out and they get Gerald Everett, who has spent a lot of
time under Shane Waldron.
Playing with Shane Waldron. So how do you see that? How do you see the role of the tight end in this offense and how the Bears might use them, and in this case, to help Caleb Williams to make his life easier?
Yeah, I don't think they're done adding to that room because Seattle ran 13 personnel at the second highest clip last year of any offense.
Real quick, if
you don't know,
we get too in the weeds.
Right. It's 1 running back, 3 tight ends is 13. 1 running back, 2 tight ends is 12. You say the number of tight end or running backs that are on the field first, and then tight ends, and that's how you get the personnel number. So there's 11 personnel, 12 personnel, 13 personnel, 21 personnel, 22 personnel.
Sidebar: my favorite part of personnel is like what gets left unsaid. So for instance, the receivers aren't accounted for in a personnel grouping. So 11 personnel, 1 and 1. Do the math. That five offensive linemen, 3 skill players, a quarterback. That leaves you with 3 receivers.
You're right.
13 personnel. You're only going to have 1 receiver.
1 receiver out there.
But it's so dorky that the receiver, the biggest position in this passing league, is the one we don't mention.
We don't, right? Because I think we just take it for granted. Like,
predicated on running backs and tight ends.
Oh, it's easy. Well, because especially now, so much of the league runs out of 11 personnel, right? And I'm not saying that Shane Waldron doesn't run a lot of 11, because he totally does. That's what everyone runs their offense through these days. But that's why you want to account for, okay, well, you definitely have 1 running back and you have 1 tight end, because we're going to talk about the receivers regardless, and that's 3 of them. But
so 13 personnel, 1 running back, 3 tight ends.
3 tight ends, which you usually only see in goal line packages for most teams. Shane Waldron likes to use it whenever, wherever, call him Shakira for 13 personnel. You love that? I love that. That was off the top of my head.
That was pretty good.
What happens though is when you use these tight ends and you use multiple tight ends, it dictates how the defense can defend you. No self-respecting defensive coordinator is going to look at 2 or 3 tight ends on the field and give you anything but base personnel, which draws the defense down. So now you've got these really heavy boxes. You have 8 or 9 guys in the box, and that leaves the back levels of the defense pretty vulnerable. So you can use that to get a really favorable matchup for a wide receiver that's running, a longer route, go route, fade, whatever it is. Or you can utilize your tight end in that pass catching sense. And because you've now drawn the defense down and left them vulnerable. It's really interesting to me too, because again, tight ends can act as extensions of the offensive line. And even when Shane Waldron trots out 13 personnel, he can still just run the ball out of it. You can get one of those mid-zone runs out of that. Or you can see you'll see a tight end kind of leak out, not unlike a play that we saw from the Green Bay Packers last year a couple of times, but gets completely lost behind the defense because they're too worried about what's happening at the line of scrimmage and how many guys are being brought down to contend with these bigger personnel. It's known as heavier personnel when you bring out multiple running backs, multiple tight ends. It's a really unique and really fun way of building off of play action too, because then you can sell whatever. You can sell a run and you can then pass the ball off. It keeps them, again, very unpredictable.
I think that is football 101, but the entire point is to get into a personnel grouping that the opposing defense can't deal with.
Right.
And again, the rules are so skewed toward passing. The rules are so skewed toward these big, gaudy receiver numbers. Teams get smaller to deal with that. And I think this is like the natural progression of, okay, if you're on the field and more than half of your defense weighs 200 pounds or less, guess what the natural response to that is?
Get a bigger receiver.
Bigger receiver or a tight end.
Right.
I mean, God bless Kyle Shanahan for doing it with a fullback. I don't know if everybody can duplicate that.
As much as I want to make fullbacks great again, no, tight ends, again, just inherently, they present those mismatches, especially with the way, like you said, defenses have evolved to contend with this passing offense, 11 personnel explosion to bring it all the way back around. And you don't have corners or safeties or so many times you just get guys that aren't equipped to deal with tight ends and how big they are. on these guys. So that's where it all comes into play. I think it's really fun too, because tight ends have such a varied skill set between staying in and blocking, or also being a threat to in the receiving game, that you can check into so many different things out of these personnel sets, dependent on what the defense is showing you.
I do think, I love that you brought it up, and it's early in their careers. We'll see. I don't know if this has earned copycat status, but what Green Bay did with Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave last
Matt
year.
LaFleur also loves using his tight ends
As rookies.
Yes.
Two guys that can contribute just enough in the run game and also are clearly very viable in the passing game.
Yeah.
It was a very fun little wrinkle for this Green Bay offense. And it made life pretty easy on their young first-round draft pick
quarterback. So let's bring this all the way back to Caleb Williams now, who's the presumed pick for the Chicago Bears. And you look at what I watched back what he did the last 2 years at USC. And Lincoln Riley does a lot of this heavier personnel stuff. He does it with running backs too, but he does a lot of play action, a lot of bootlegs, and has heavier personnel on the field for this same reason. It's not the same system, but there are some similar concepts that, again, would make a guy like Caleb Williams feel pretty comfortable. And inherently, this system is still a little bit simple and easy to build off of, not only within games, but within the season too.
So what you're saying is, we were already very confident Caleb Williams is going to be the pick. And now we're confident that Caleb Williams is going to be all right. Like, I'm reading this story, and I'll say it one more time. Go check it out, foxsports.com. It's easy to get enthusiastic when you think about the natural ability, obviously, but then what Chicago has put in place. And now I see the groundwork for how this scheme might work. And I'm not calling the guy the rookie of the year already.
No.
But I'm very optimistic about what this can look like. And that was a problem in Chicago with the last regime.
It really was. And what we're going to have to see now is the execution. You can have all these wonderful things on paper, but it has to work at the end of the day. And I think we're going to see the last kind of final few pieces come into play in the draft, where Chicago is really going to tailor themselves to what Shane Waldron wants to do, which is why my dark horse for who I think the Bears could take at number 9.
Don't do it. No, don't do it. I'm going to stop you right there, because that's actually something we're going to talk about in the Fact or Fiction segment. We've laid it out. The Bears have a lot of options in front of them with their other first-round pick, and that's where we're going to lead Fact or Fiction on the other side of this commercial break, where that might go. All right, back with Fox Sports NFC North reporter Carmen Vitali. Time to play a little bit of Fact or Fiction, and it ties in perfectly. Like we said, we'll start it off here because I'm all of a sudden so curious about what the Bears might do at number 9 overall. We know it's Caleb, and it feels for a while that it's been very receiver focused at number 9.
Sure.
On top of that, word coming out at the beginning of the week that the Bears are having a 30 visit with Marvin Harrison Jr.
Sure. Why not?
Well, do they know something that I don't?
Because this is I don't understand people getting kind of up in arms about top 30 visits. You have 30 of them. Use them. You can use them for whoever. I don't buy into
a guy that will definitely not be there unless you trade up for him. That's what makes it interesting. Like, Marvin Harrison ain't hanging around till 9. It's not happening. So if you're interested in using one, and I know you get 30 of them, but there's hundreds of players eligible to be picked. If you want to visit with him, you're at least slightly intrigued by the idea of moving up the board to get him. Am I crazy?
No, I think that, again, this goes along with all possible options. This is what this time of year is for in these front offices. They absolutely explore every possible scenario when it comes to who they could trade up for, who might be there, what positions of need do they have. At 9, that's a little bit easier because you can kind of hone in on who would be there, who wouldn't. But again, there's still these scenarios where, like, all right, we could take matters into our own hands and we could trade up if we really want to. But given the fact that the Bears only have 4 picks in this draft, I don't really see there being much capital, and it would kind of buck what Ryan Poles has done so far as the GM of Chicago to make a move like that.
Let's get into it a little bit. Okay, so in the first segment, we outlined all of these things Shane Waldron might like to do. And it plays itself pretty well with what could be there for the Bears at 9 overall. There's a ton of good offensive tackles in this draft if they want to do that. There's also a very special tight end prospect.
See, you gave it away. I said I had a dark horse, and you didn't have to say it was a tight end. It's Brock Bowers, guys. It's Brock Bowers. That is my dark horse for who I think the Chicago Bears could draft at number 9, because given everything I just outlined in the earlier segment about Shane Waldron's offense, his propensity for using play action off of multiple tight end sets, which requires pass catching tight ends specifically on top of guys that can block, I think a tight end like Brock Bowers, who's a really natural pass catcher, is more valuable to this offense under Shane Waldron than another receiver. I get the argument that Keenan Allen might not play for you for that much longer, maybe a couple more years, and you want to get a guy in now and develop him along with the young quarterback. That makes sense to me, and I don't think that would be a wrong approach to take. But from what I've seen so far, I just think that another tight end, especially one as good as Brock Bowers, would be more valuable to what Shane Waldron is trying to do in Chicago.
I also think when you talk about Brock Bowers, it helps to think about it more specifically. Like, Brock Bowers is not a tight end in the way that you might be thinking of it. You know, like this big, slow dude that's going to put his hand in the dirt 40 times a game. Like, no, this is a guy who can split off the line, play like a Y offline tight end. Who he's a oversized slot receiver.
That was the interesting thing about Shane's offense as well, was even when they were in 11 personnel where they only had one tight end on the field, these tight ends spend most of their time off the ball, whether that's just offset from the line or whether that's fully in the slot. And that's something that we've seen Brock Bowers do at the collegiate level, which is also pretty rare. And I think that it would just be a really good fit. I cannot stress that. For my money, a tight end like Brock Bowers is just way more valuable for Chicago.
Okay, let's examine. I guess there's two other things.
Then a wideout.
What about an offensive tackle?
That's where this gets a little bit tricky, because is Braxton Jones your left tackle or is he not? I know that Ryan Poles drafted him in the 5th round out of Southern Utah. If you get your left tackle, your starting left tackle in the 5th round out of Southern Utah, that you can hang your hat on that as a GM forever. And I get that they want to make that happen, but now Braxton Jones has had the benefit of 2 NFL off seasons. Has he gotten stronger? Has he gotten to the level that he needs to get to contend with these defensive ends? And I don't know that you can just really say that with confidence that he's your guy, especially for a young quarterback who, I mean, a guy like Caleb Williams can get himself out of trouble, but you don't want him to necessarily have to do it. That's what we saw last year at USC, where he's kind of creating out of necessity because his line can't hold up. You don't want to force him to create because that's his only option. You want him to create because he's free to do so, and he sees something and tries to, find that throwing lane, but not because he absolutely has to. And you're going to have some really good tackle prospects available at number 9, which might make it hard to pass on.
I mean, the fun thing for me is I get it. It's not sexy, and maybe it's not as pressing a need as other spots, but you draft a tackle, you automatically have the best swing tackle in football, or the most talented anyway, whether that's Braxton or the rookie.
Right.
There's also so many versatile offensive linemen. You could play that guy at guard for a year or 2 years before you have to do something else with him. One last thing to consider, trading down. They only have the 4 picks.
I think the Bears are a really good candidate to trade down. But again, you look at, all right, the Jets are right behind them. What do the Jets need? Offensive tackle, wide receiver, tight end.
Similar.
Well, the Bears need all of those things too. So are you comfortable, whatever you would get in return, you have to be comfortable giving up a blue chip starter at a position of need to trade back. Now, if you get 2 starters at positions of need because you trade back, great. That's probably worth it. But you need to weigh that option, and that return needs to be substantial in order for you to move off of someone who would undoubtedly be a starter for you at that number 9 spot.
All right, so fact or fiction? I think the question we started with was, I mean, trading up for a wide receiver, we definitely think it's fiction, just because
that's definitely
they
fiction.
Don't really have the resources. But what about just drafting a receiver at 9 overall, and a receiver specifically.
That a wide out.
We're calling that fiction.
I'm calling that fiction. Definitely trading up is fiction. It's gonna be hard if and when one of those top 3 receivers falls to you at number 9, say like a Rome Odunze out of Washington.
Going away from that guy.
Yeah. It's going to be hard to do that. But I also just think that this is a really good class for wide receivers in general. And yes, they don't have another pick until the 3rd round, but that doesn't mean that you can't still get a really good player at that point in the draft. Not to mention, you have wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 locked up with some really good vets. I know you need a contingency plan for when Keenan Allen eventually leaves or doesn't play football anymore because he's up there in age, but you don't need to address that now. And you don't need that person to be successful now.
I'm with you. I mean, you can find a wide receiver 3 at pick 75.
Sure can.
Especially when you consider Cole Kmet, Gerald Everett, are potentially Brock Bowers are going to be pieces of this offense.
Yes, big
as well.
Ones. Yep.
I'm very intrigued by the upside of going a different way. So I'm going to say fiction as well. Let's stick in your division.
Okay.
For something,
they're so dramatic, aren't they? My division is so dramatic.
It has been a busy offseason in the NFC North, which let's go for a much more straightforward one. The Minnesota Vikings, speaking of visits, so you're telling me...
Is it straightforward?
You're telling me... I think it is. You're telling me not to take it too seriously that the Vikings are hosting defensive tackle Byron Murphy out of the University of Texas.
Exactly.
A clear first-round pick.
Yes.
Because you
have 30 visits. Use them. You never know. Maybe he does drop out of the first round. This is a very offensive.
I love that that's where you went, though, because you're saying, and that is our factor fiction. The Vikings are definitely trading pick 23 and pick 11 to move up the board for their quarterback. Factor fiction.
That's fact. Wait, fiction. What are we saying? What are we saying? They're definitely using those.
They're definitely
trading up. Yes, that's fact.
Okay.
I'm not moving off of my stance. I said it on this podcast last time I think I was here, where I said the Minnesota Vikings are moving up and getting a quarterback this draft. I don't see why you make that trade with Houston to get the number 23 pick to not arm yourself with this. And again, I keep going back to the fact that it came out much later that the Minnesota Vikings were in on trying to trade up for CJ Stroud last year. Mm-hmm. And they had a fraction of the capital they have this year. Minnesota has 9 draft picks this year. They have some cap space. They absolutely have so much flexibility right now. You don't go out and arm yourself with another first-round pick if you don't think that you're going to try to move up, if you're not going to be aggressive. This is Minnesota's back against the wall, being aggressive, saying we need to get a quarterback come hell or high water this year.
I agree with you. I think it's fact. Do you think there's any room for leeway where, say, for some reason, somebody beats them to the punch? We can get to a couple of those scenarios in a minute, but the guy that they love isn't there anymore. Do you and maybe this is why you visit with other first round prospects. Do you think there's a world where if it all goes to shit, they pick 11th and 23rd and figure it out later? Or maybe they pick a quarterback with one of those picks because the guy that they loved at the top of the board was gone? Or, I mean, you said hell or high water. Do you really think it's no ifs, ands, or buts, whatever we've got to part with to get there, we're going to do it?
I really think that's probably the attitude. But again, you bring up the point that this is out of Minnesota's control. Doing a deal with another team and trading up is not a one-sided thing. You need 2 to tango. If they can't get it done, and I think there's a very slim chance, and I don't think that there's a ton that they wouldn't do to move up. Maybe you do look at a guy like Michael Penix Jr. at 11 or something like that. And then you are faced with a back end pick of the first round where you're like, oh yeah, I mean, that's not inconceivable that a guy like Byron Murphy would be there at pick 23. So it's one of those things where it's a contingency plan because again, you get 30 of these top 30 visits. But I don't think it's one that the Minnesota Vikings will willingly take. They're trying to go up and get their franchise quarterback of the future. But I don't know if that means that person starts right away for Minnesota. I think that there is absolutely a reality where Sam Darnold starts the season for the Minnesota Vikings as you are bringing along whoever it is you have waiting in the wings under center.
I think that would actually be really smart. I mean, you paid Sam Darnold pretty well.
$10 million
for a backup, and the ecosystem is there. You know, I mean, the offense is in really good shape.
This is a team that is kind of insulated against the quarterback position. Like they're not going to go on a deep playoff run with Sam Darnold under center, but they have really good weapons on offense. Got a good offensive line, and you got a defense that can win you games as well. Not to mention, you have two former quarterbacks that are in charge of this offense, and Kevin O'Connell and now Josh McCown, who's the quarterback's coach there. They know how valuable it is to ease a quarterback into the league and not have to put the weight of the world on his shoulders right away. I think this is absolutely a team that can win some games with Sam Darnold under center. So why not utilize that option? Why not cross that bridge? Because he's a bridge quarterback.
I see what you did.
Cross that bridge on your way to your quarterback of the future.
At the very least, give Sam 7 games until the pressure of the actual results outweighs it. But I do it's a good, sound strategy for right now. So we agree. Fact. I think the Vikings are going to have to find a way to do it.
I do too.
I don't think you do. You don't take this measure in the pre-draft process. Like, well, we feel like picking twice in the first round this year. Not on a quarterback, but that's what we want to do. I don't buy it.
I don't either.
Let's tie it in though.
Okay.
With this other report coming from the legend, Tom Curran out of New England, Patriots beat writer. Because the report coming out of New England is that the Pats would have to receive a lot more than 3 first-round picks to be willing to trade down. Basically, Tom Curran saying the Patriots are in on the quarterbacks that will be available to them 3rd overall, whether that's Drake Maye, whether that's Jaden Daniels, maybe JJ McCarthy. It's going to take a haul to get them out of there. Fact or fiction that's true, and I can't help but think that it applies to the Minnesota Vikings.
Oh yeah, this is absolutely a subtweet. Are we still calling them that?
Yes.
Subtweets.
They didn't tag the Vikings.
They didn't tag the Vikings in it, but they're absolutely talking to the Vikings. Yeah, no kidding that it's going to take a haul to get into the top 3, especially when you're outside the top 10. I think I would love if New England was a little more self-aware, though, because I don't think they're really set up to take a quarterback right now. But how often do you have the 3rd overall pick? I get it. They want to drive. What I'm getting at is they're trying to drive the price up of this pick because they want a haul because they have so many holes and so many needs on that roster. I think they would be not smart to not take a haul and address all of these other needs when you have the opportunity to do so at that number 3 pick. But either way, whatever team decides to come up into some area of the top 5, whether it be the 3rd overall pick, whether it be the 4th pick with the Cardinals, whether it be the 5th pick with the Chargers, you're going to have to overpay because there's more than one team that is likely trying to trade up for a quarterback. And that's something that I actually wrote for FoxSports.com a couple weeks ago, where exploring different Vikings trade up packages. Yeah, they were all really rich, but guess what? When you're outside of the top 10 to get into the top 5 and then have to outbid other teams, it's going to be expensive. Sorry, guys.
I'm sure this is going to age poorly because that's how it works. Like, we can never predict the way that this goes down to a science, but this feels so obvious right now. Because fun fact, there's only 3 teams in this year's draft right now that have multiple 1st-round picks. It's the Bears, the Cardinals, and the Minnesota Vikings. As we spent the beginning of the show detailing, like, the Bears have their quarterback. Right. So they don't really have multiple 1st-round picks because that's going to be Caleb Williams.
Yes.
The Cardinals, unless they are pulling the greatest con of all time, believe in Kyler Murray. And that just leaves the Vikings, who have the 1st-round capital that nobody else can really compete with.
Right.
And so it makes it, I hate to say it makes it easy to read the tea leaves, but that's what they want to do. And they are one of the only teams that can make that type of offer of like, hey, you're going to pick twice in this draft, and then we'll still throw in some stuff later.
Yeah, 1st-round pick later. That's what this is going to take, again, because you are, depending on how high you trade up, if you're the Minnesota Vikings. And I think that's very much dependent on what Washington does it too, is how far Minnesota is willing to trade up or how far some of these teams are willing to trade up. Because if you take a guy that, Minnesota was in love with, we've heard a lot connecting Drake Maye and Minnesota. If he's gone at number 2, are you really going to go up to number 3 to get JJ McCarthy? I don't know. I don't, but maybe you are, because you want to hop Denver. You want to hop Las Vegas. You want to hop these other teams that need a quarterback as well. I'm not sure the answer to that. That's why this is so interesting. And it's also so frustrating for the Minnesota Vikings, because so much about this year's draft for them is out of their control.
And I think that's one thing I always want to emphasize is, like, it's easy for us on the outside to say, well, they're going to go up for their quarterback. And that could be all 4 of them,
Right.
They might only love one of these guys enough to do the deal.
Right.
And you just got to basically pray. I'll believe Washington's moving off that pick when I see it happen.
I know.
They're just, you talk about the Patriots not being well set up. The Commanders are well set up to draft that guy.
They are.
And when you think about new ownership being in place, they traded away Sam Howell. I think Marcus Mariota would start for them if they didn't draft a quarterback. So you do the math on that. I don't buy it. I think the Commanders are going to pick their guy, and the draft really gets interesting at 3. And it's just a matter of how much do the Vikings like what's left when 2 quarterbacks have been taken off the board.
Or, again, if the Washington doesn't take take Drake Maye at this point.
Yeah.
In this example, I guess in particular.
The variable that I always want to bring up, and you and I, we worked for NFL teams.
We did.
We know that this stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum.
No.
New England has, let's just be honest, an 82-year-old owner in Robert Kraft who knows what kicking ass and taking names with a great quarterback looks like.
Yeah.
And has been stuck not having that for a while now and probably hates it. So, like, where
did he get that quarterback?
Oh, we want to try to replicate.
You're going to be able to replicate getting a quarterback at 199. I'm not saying that, but you tried it with Mac Jones. It didn't work out. Who's to say that if you got a Hall, you still couldn't get?
I'm team Hall. Is that?
I'm absolutely team Hall.
I'm Patriots. Get the hell out of there.
Get out of there. Get a Hall. Address so many needs on your roster. You could accelerate this rebuild in New England. You could just shorten that timeline so much.
And yet, I can't say that this is a fact. I think I personally have to say this is fiction, because I think this is just me speculating recklessly, because that's what we're doing here today.
Right.
I think the organizational desire for a franchise quarterback is going to outweigh all of that. I don't know that that's the right call.
No, I mean,
but that's what I think.
We cannot conflate should with will.
Right.
Like what they should do versus what they will do. And you're right. This is all of these crazy dynamics and pressures that come from ownership, from a fan base, from even like as far as like sponsors and the way that, all the business aspect of all of this works.
Those activations don't look so good when you don't have a fun quarterback, do they?
They really, really don't. So as someone who worked for a team that didn't have Tom Brady under center and then worked for the same team that did have Tom Brady under center, I can tell you everything about the organization changes when you get someone like that as your quarterback.
That's all I'm saying. All right. So I'm saying fiction, although I do think that is in New England's best long-term interest.
Yeah, they should trade down. Will they? I think I'm with you. I don't think they will.
TBD. Let's tie it in. We can keep this going because there's an interesting fly in the ointment at number 6, and that comes off of a report. I think we could have guessed this, but an interesting report from friend of the show, Diana Rossini of The Athletic, that the Giants are showing strong interest at the quarterback position. Quote, either they want to draft a quarterback or they want teams to think they need to trade with the Giants if they want one. So like either they want a quarterback or they want to convince teams that they got to get up there. I'm curious, are we buying that the Giants are actually going to draft a quarterback? Remember, Daniel Jones recovering from an ACL. He's tied to them for one more year. The contract is very big, but they can get away from it in 2025. They also brought on Drew Lock. So they don't, quote, need it, but maybe they do based on the way the quarterback play has looked in New York over the last few years.
Honestly, what the Giants are doing is driving the price of the number 5 pick up. They're driving the price of the Chargers pick up. Like, okay, you're going to say that the Giants want a quarterback? Great. Then I need to jump them to get one.
Yeah, I'm not sure you're going to want to do business with the team that might be drafting a quarterback.
Exactly. Like, you're going to say, well, what's it going to take for the Chargers to trade down? And I think the Chargers are an excellent trade down candidate, because they don't need a quarterback. And if you have someone that wants to come into the top 5 for a quarterback, you absolutely can do that deal if you're the Los Angeles Chargers. So I think, I don't know. I think the rumor mill is a little misdirected here with the Giants. Either they're actually looking at a quarterback, in which case I think the Giants would need to trade up to get their guy. Unless maybe their guy is JJ McCarthy, who I'm not ready to buy as the number 4 overall pick. Again, it's going to be so interesting if we see like quarterbacks 1, 2, 3, 4. It never ends up really working like that.
Right.
But if you think JJ McCarthy is your franchise guy based on the traits and based on what you have in place, so much of rookie quarterback success in this league is based on the environment with which they go into. If you're the Minnesota Vikings and you do a deal with the Arizona Cardinals, you're doing that for JJ McCarthy, assuming Drake Maye is already gone. And I think that could end up working out really well in Minnesota for all the reasons we outlined before, with how many weapons he has on offense, a great defense to lean on, not to mention a former quarterback and head coach that can play quarterback from the sideline, by the way, because we saw him play Madden last year with some backups when Kirk Cousins went down, and bring along a guy with a bridge quarterback in place to ease him into the league, like JJ McCarthy, who maybe needs some extra reps because he wasn't asked to do a whole lot in Michigan. I'm just saying, there is a situation where JJ McCarthy could be a top 5 pick and it would be worth it. You just don't know. And I don't think that the Giants talking about how they might want a quarterback is going to incentivize anybody to trade with them. It sounds like they want to haul themselves.
Let's assume they're not going to get it, because 6
also isn't high enough.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so let's assume they're not going to get that trade call. Do you think they draft a quarterback? Whether it's, let's say they stay put and somebody's there.
Who would be there at that point? That's my question.
JJ McCarthy, probably.
If he's still there at 6, then I'm shocked if he's still there at 6.
I think I would be surprised too, but you said it yourself. Like, it often goes this way where we get into lockstep about what's going to happen. And then these guys slide a little bit, and you find out like, oh, okay, not everybody was as high on them as we all thought from the outside. So like, I could talk myself into JJ hanging around until 6. I don't think any of the other 3 I don't buy, though, especially when you consider somebody might trade up.
And then if it does come to fruition, like we're all talking about, if quarterbacks going 1, 2, 3, 4, who are you taking at 6? You're not going to take Michael Penix Jr. at 6. I'm higher on Michael Penix Jr. than most. You're not taking him at 6. That
would surprise me.
You're not taking Bo Nix at 6. You're not taking Spencer Rattler at 6. So I don't really. I think really New York is trying to manufacture leverage that they don't have.
I buy that, and I mainly just wonder if what's going to be interesting with the Giants is if they feel like they need a quarterback badly enough to trade up for one, because I think they would have to.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about that to me, and Giants fans, don't come for me, I'm not hating on them, but it is interesting. They traded their 39th overall pick to Carolina for Brian Burns. Brian Burns is an amazing player. The Giants pass rush looks as good on paper as it has in a long time, but that's a major bargaining chip that you now don't have. They do still have pick 47 in the Leonard Williams trade with Seattle from last season, but 39 really feels like it would have helped you get somewhere if that was your goal. We talk about like, why did the Vikings do this if they're not going to trade up? Like, why did they acquire pick 23 if they're not going to trade up?
Right.
For the Giants, I'm like, if you think you want to trade up, why did you get rid of
your second round pick, especially when you're just outside of the top 5? I think that's a really great point when it comes to what the Giants are trying to do. Also, do you want the same regime that drafted Daniel Jones
Not really.
to draft another quarterback? Are you willing to give them another?
It's not the same regime that drafted him. It's the same regime that paid him.
That paid him. You're right.
Yeah.
That gave him that contract. Clearly, thinking that Daniel Jones was the franchise guy. So like if do you trust that evaluation to bring in a new guy? I don't know the answer to that.
I asked somebody about that the other day, and their answer, and I was like, John Mara watched Brian Daboll and Joe Shane pay Daniel Jones, and now a year later, you're so out on Daniel Jones that you might trade up in the draft to get a new guy.
Yeah.
And the answer I got back was like, well, if it's going to happen, John Mara's just placed his trust in those two guys that they know what they're doing,
which doesn't often happen. So I mean, more power to you if you give your guys carte blanche.
What's weird is like I think I'm okay with that. I'm putting a lot of stock in Brian Daboll's role in developing Josh Allen,
right?
And I'm like, if you like a guy, I'm gonna trust that you know what you're talking about. But at the same time, why is Daniel Jones on a $40 million salary if we know how to evaluate quarterback play? I don't know. The Giants are very interesting to me. This whole stretch, starting with 3 at New England to the Giants at 6, because like once you get to Tennessee and Atlanta and Chicago, I'm like, oh, I feel like I have a good idea what might happen there.
Maybe.
But from 3 to 6, it just feels like it's anybody's guess.
Yeah, it is. The whole top 10, honestly, is going to be very, very interesting, I think, to me.
Let's move on to some news. It's not so much team news, but it is top 10 news.
Okay.
My LSU Tiger brethren, Malik Nabers,
oh boy,
was in the news over the weekend he's in the news for not great reasons, but we also have not a whole lot to go on. It's the classic draft season. Anonymous reports that he's a high maintenance player. I think it was from Tony Pauline. The direct quote was, he's a high maintenance prospect who might struggle in a big city. Like I said, it's the classic pre-draft anonymous thing where you have to wonder at the motivation. Malik was arrested in 2023 for a gun possession, but no charge ever came of that. So, I mean, I guess there's a documented issue here, but it doesn't seem like enough smoke to go on that I buy that he's actually going to fall in the draft.
So I did some digging. I asked a few people around the league, all right, this is lying season. So is somebody trying to manufacture some stuff about Malik Nabers to get him to drop, right? And see if they have a shot at him. But I was like, is this just like the media now doing this? And they're like, now? This has been a concern with him. And I was like, oh, that's very interesting. That's not something enough that would make Malik not get drafted or not get him drafted in the first round because he's talented enough to do that. But he has exhibited some concerning tendencies to be kind of a diva, kind of high maintenance, kind of everything that this report is saying. And I don't so much think that it's a matter of if he couldn't be successful in a big market. I think it's more along the lines of, can he be successful on a team that might not have immediate success? I think that's where you draw the line in the sand between guys that are maybe a little bit problematic from a personality standpoint. If you're winning, it's pretty easy to manage multiple big personalities or even problematic personalities. If you're losing, that's only going to exacerbate some of these issues that have been brought up to teams. Again, from what I was told, this is not enough to take Malik Nabers off of draft boards, but it is something that teams are concerned with.
Which, I mean, and this is not damning. I mainly just find it funny. But Malik Nabers, talking about the Giants, speaking of New York, said, if they got a caliber of receiver like me, they're going to want to get him the ball, or they want to get me the ball. So I'm sure they're going to want to have a quarterback who can do that. Malik Nabers kind of saying, they're not
Daniel Jones ain't that dude.
They're just like, they're not going to draft me without having a way to get me the football, which, I mean, it's the classic like catch-22. You want a receiver with that attitude.
Right. I was going to say, you need a receiver that's confident.
But that attitude can turn into consternation if the football is not
that attitude with added context of it being a pattern of behavior is what's concerning. It's not, you can talk all the bravado you want. You can talk all the smack you want on the field, all that kind of stuff. We love that out of these guys. But if it translates to locker room and therefore his assimilation into the locker room and things outside of what happens on the field, then that's when you start to be concerned. And like I said, some NFL teams are concerned about Malik Nabers and what he brings to the table as far as his high maintenance personality.
I'm just curious, I guess, how much consequence there is for that. Because I hear you.
Yeah.
And like I mean, there was an arrest last year that I like teams are going to dig into that stuff.
Sure.
I still would imagine Malik Nabers doesn't experience a real fall down the draft board. Like you're still talking about, like you said, is it enough to keep teams from wanting to draft him? And I assume the answer is probably no, because the talent outweighs it.
And again, that's what I was told was it's not bad enough that teams don't want to draft him, but he won't necessarily be easy to manage per se, is what I was told. Something
to keep an eye on as we get closer to the draft. It's that time of year. Speaking, we're going to keep it with prospects. Drake Maye. Widely presumed as QB2 heading into the draft. A lot of people had him as QB1. Now, again, it's that type of season where people are dinging everybody, saying, I'm reading a quote from Merrill Hodge here. It said he's the kind of player that gets you fired, especially if you draft him in the top 5. He's going to get you fired. As a longtime Drake Maye stan, like, I don't think I buy like this. This to me, again, feels like trying to push people's stock down, trying to give other teams options. Like, I think Drake Maye is going number 2 overall, and I'm just not moving off that spot without more evidence.
I mean, please let him drop a little bit so the Minnesota Vikings have a chance at him. I think he'd do great for the Vikings. I think he'd do great in Minnesota, great under Kevin O'Connell. No, I don't buy this at all. This is a little bit out of the box. But it's something I think I heard even Dane Brugler say. And Drake Maye is like the little brother of his family, right? He's got 3 older brothers that all played collegiate sports. He's Drake Maye's not Drake Maye. He's Luke Maye's younger brother who played basketball at UNC.
Right.
I've actually gotten to spend time around Luke and the Maye family. Like, they are so competitive, and they willingly say that Drake is the most competitive of all of them. So he's got this chip on his shoulder growing up in this extremely athletic family. Their dad was a Hall of Famer, like collegiately. I don't know. He was also an athlete. Dane Brugler did a really good job of breaking this down on the Athletic football show the other day. But I put a lot of stock in something like that, because you've pitched above your weight class like your entire life when you're the younger brother. I don't know. You're the younger brother. You probably know this.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're always trying to keep up with your older brothers.
Yeah.
And Drake Maye is like the quintessential guy that does that, because he's been with older brothers that were really phenomenal athletes, and his athleticism in general is going way underrated. Like, this is a guy, this was another stat that I saw, that he has the second most runs over 10 yards in the last 2 seasons behind Jaden Daniels. I mean,
he's got talent, man.
So he can maneuver the pocket, he can get outside the pocket, he can create, but then he can also play in rhythm. He's got an arm. Like, I don't understand why we're underrating his athleticism when, again, he also played basketball, and I guess he played shortstop too. It's maddening to me. I think this is just part of lying season.
I think he got stuck trying to do too much on a middling football team.
Something that Madeline Burke told me, who I think she was at the pro day. She actually, speaking of the Giants, can't get away from the Giants. She's one of the Giants team reporters. But she said something about Drake Maye's pro day that I really put a lot of stock in as well, which was, if he did have a miscue throughout one of his throws, he immediately went back and he corrected it, and he kept going. Like, mind of a goldfish, which is a really great thing to have as a quarterback, where you just completely forget your mistake. You go out there, you do it again, and you make sure that you're on your P's and Q's there. So that was really cool too. Just like his attitude and the way that he's been brought up to know what it means to play football, basketball at a high level. Like, that's not nothing. So I just think that he can assimilate into the league really well. He's got really underrated athleticism. He's a really good quarterback, and we cannot let Like, can we get away from this, like, UNC quarterbacks don't translate to the league? Like, stop scouting the helmet. Why are we scouting the helmet?
That's a line. That's my favorite line. I don't care.
I don't care.
That Mitch Trubisky went there 7 years ago.
I don't care.
I'm with you, man. I've got him at, like I said, it's going to take a lot to move me off my spot. I just think Drake Maye's package of athleticism, arm talent.
And again, he didn't have a lot to work with last year. So I like the fact that he's been through a ringer a little bit.
We'll see where it goes. Like I said, I'm not buying it. This type of stuff happens all the time. It happened to CJ Stroud last year.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about, I don't think he's going to go number 2 overall, but we'll finish on this note with a quarterback prospect. Ever since his pro day, Michael Penix Jr. feels like the arrow pointed upward.
Yeah.
Albert Breer, another friend of the show, said one thing, making the calls, talking to people this week. He says coaches seem to be higher than scouts on Michael Penix Jr. Some have him ahead of the presumed top guys, excluding Caleb Williams, quote. So like somewhere out there in the NFL community, some people see Michael Penix Jr. as the second best quarterback in this class, which I don't think I buy, but I do think is very interesting.
I mean, somebody out there probably, okay. But I don't know that you can confidently put him in the same tier as some of these other guys we're talking about, just given his medicals alone. Honestly, like,
that's what scares me.
It scares me. I know that he's passed every test. He ran the sub 4.640 at his pro day, wanted to show scouts and teams that he can still be athletic. I think he rushed 8 times for Washington last season. Like, it's not something that he was asked to do.
No.
But it sounds like it's something that he would be open to and wants to do at the next level. But at the same time, when you're talking about multiple knee surgeries and all that kind of stuff, that's enough to scare teams down to putting you in the next tier. I do think he is incredibly accurate. Watching like the eye test, I remember watching him this past season and being like, dang, like the throws that he was making, the anticipation he had, the ball placement, all just incredible for a young player. And I think, again, those are all very translatable skills to the NFL level. It's just the medicals for me where I can't confidently say, all right, yeah, I want you in, the top 5.
I think I've said this on the show before, but he's so interesting to me because if you could convince me Michael Penix goes 10 overall, you could convince me he's still hanging around sometime into the second round, depending, because watch the guy play, watch the confidence he plays with, some of the throws he can make. You meant some of the anticipation and the timing of his throws, of how he works in their offense. And you look at the medicals and 2 ACL injuries on the same leg, I believe, and just has unfortunately had to deal with a lot of that.
Right.
And like I said, like I could see either one. All it takes is one team to fall in love. I mean, I think Minnesota's a perfect example.
Yeah.
Like everything you said about JJ McCarthy could apply to Michael Penix Jr., where we're like, yeah, we'll stash this guy behind Sam Darnold and we've got a great offense for him to work in, and given enough time with a former quarterback for a head coach, we really feel like we got something here.
Yeah, for sure.
I could see that as early in this, not top 5.
No, not top 5. Not top 5. But yeah, if they stick at their number 11 pick because they can't trade up, I think I mentioned that earlier. I was like, could they go and get Michael Penix? Yeah, that's within the realm of possibility.
I think that's, I wonder, I'm not going to call him like a consolation prize, but I feel like there's a pretty firm line, it seems like, in the scouting community between the top 4. And then after that, that's when you start talking about Penix and Bo Nix,
I think it is interesting to, though, project a few years into the future because this quarterback class is stacked. And in any other year, like if you put Michael Penix Jr. in the draft last year, in his current state, with the 40 time, with the whatever,
and like the clean medicals,
all that kind of stuff. If you put him in the draft last year or even the year before, you have to think that he is one of the top quarterbacks that you're talking about. I think that he's a kind of a victim of circumstance when it comes to the fact that this class in particular is one of the best we've seen in a few years. But then looking down the line, like, okay, well then if you did end up with Michael Penix Jr. this year,
That is really funny.
It could turn into something really good.
So like last year, I don't think Michael Penix goes over Bryce Young or CJ Stroud.
No.
I don't think he goes over Anthony Richardson off of potential alone, because Anthony Richardson he's so talented. Then after that, though, yeah, I can absolutely see it. I think your next quarterback taken was Will Levis at 33.
Mm-hmm.
That's how, and then, I mean, if we go back to 2022.
I was going to say 2022 is where I was really thinking.
That's the Kenny Pickett draft.
That's the Kenny Pickett draft. I'm like, I would take Michael Penix Jr.
You mean to tell me Michael Penix Jr. doesn't go over Kenny Pickett?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Or Malik Willis or Desmond Ridder?
Absolutely. I mean, Kenny was the only one taken in the first round, period.
Right.
So, yeah, I absolutely think that Michael Penix Jr., had he come out 2 years ago with this clean bill of health and everything, we are kind of talking about him as a consolation prize, but I think a lot of that is a victim of circumstance.
I just wonder, and I agree, but I just wonder what the cutoff is. Like, Will Levis is a great example. Remember, he was getting top 5 buzz.
He was.
And
so Malik Willis, for that matter.
True. But Levis fell to pick 33. He was still there at the start of the second round before Tennessee got him. So what is the margin for error, for lack of a better term? Like, does somebody love Michael Penix Jr. enough to, let's just say, the Las Vegas Raiders because they need a quarterback, 13th overall? Or do they feel more comfortable with the pick in the second round? More so than any other prospect, I don't know the answer to that.
You're right.
And the margin for error is going to be very interesting. I will say fiction as far as being a top, I'll even say 10 pick. I would be surprised if Penix is a top 10 pick.
But it's if he'll be a first round pick.
I'm going to say
fact.
On podcast. I mean, you got Denver, you got Vegas picking 12 and 13.
Right.
Maybe Minnesota's plan falls apart and they're still picking 23rd overall. Your Tampa Bay Buccaneers, maybe they draft a succession plan at 26th for Baker. That feels far-fetched, but I'm trying to think outside the box, man. Maybe somebody trades up into the bottom of the first round. Like, again, I mean, that's where New York could have come up from 39 if they still had it. Maybe New York comes up for him in the second round. So you're saying fact, first round pick.
First round pick, yeah. Like I said, not top 10, but
New England at 30. Ooh, New England at 34. Maybe they trade out of 3 overall.
And then trade back in.
And trade back in with,
Or maybe they trade out of 3 overall and they go down somewhere like 11 with the Vikings. And they ended up taking him there, or they pick up the possibilities are endless and they're almost impossible to predict.
They are. That's why it's fun to talk about, though.
Yeah,
if I was like, if Robert Kraft was like, we got to get a quarterback, I would be like, look, let us trade out. We'll get next year's one from somebody, and then we'll go get this kid. We'll go get Michael Penix, who's got a cannon, who's not afraid to let it rip. We'll get him in the middle of the first, and we'll add resources while still getting you a quarterback. Everybody happy?
That's the thing, is I really want Michael Penix Jr. wherever he goes to go into an offense that is like, actually, it's funny you brought up the Bucks, because under Bruce Arians, a Bruce Arians offense would have been perfect for Michael Penix Jr. I think it's something that Mina Kimes actually
grip it and rip it.
Yeah, just like somewhere where you could just give him like just downfield throws all the time, like push it down the field. Like Michael Penix Jr. would be fantastic at that. I don't know if that exists in the league anymore.
I'm uniquely excited to see, more so than recent classes, probably because like we knew Carolina was up there at the top. Like last year, it lacked intrigue to me because it felt so obvious. But this year, other than Caleb, it's such a mystery.
Yep, for sure.
Can't wait to see how it all shakes out for all of them. Carmen Vitali, that was a winding look through.
Really windy.
The rumors that are circulating around the top 10. Yeah. I'm sure we'll have new information that's going to make it look more confusing like days from now. In the meantime, that was really fun. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
That does it for today's show. That's all we got. Like I said, we'll be back later this week with a chat from Dane Brugler from The Athletic. The draft guru himself is going to stop by to break down the finer points of this year's draft class. Can't wait for that. In the meantime, make sure you're subscribed on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. Maybe stop by, give us a review. Go follow the YouTube channel, NFL on Fox. All things NFL on Fox posted there. At NFL on Fox Pod is our social handle on Twitter, on TikTok, on Instagram, wherever you get your NFL news, your NFL content, you can find us there. As always, I appreciate it so much, and I'll talk to you all real soon.